Hello, I'm Stacey Sauter sitting in for Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up, the County Council is preparing to hold a hearing on Bill 3525, which would strongly limit how county agencies collect, retain, and share immigration-related information. Critics raise concerns about the scope of its costs and authority. And building permits in MoCo are down over 90% since rent control started in 2024. This is a serious problem. What message does this send to potential businesses looking to relocate to the DMV, and what can be done to fix it? Also, critics point to a leaked political training manual reportedly linked to the National Education Association, which they say reflects strong ideological bias against viewpoints in public education that don't align with the political left. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We are joined by the current vice chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Party, Reardon Sullivan, otherwise known as Sully, good guy all around, and another good guy, Mike Knapp, a local Democrat activist and former member of the Montgomery County Council. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Expedited Bill 3525 would codify and expand Montgomery County's existing promoting community trust policies by limiting how agencies collect, retain, and share immigration-related information. It would restrict cooperation with federal civil immigration enforcement and require deletion of status data unless required by law. Supporters say it strengthens civil rights and public safety. Critics question the breadth of authority, enforcement standards, and whether restricted data collection limits transparency, cost evaluation, and accountability. Sully, I'm going to go to you first. Bill 3525 appears to have unanimous council support, raising concerns that an upcoming public hearing may have limited impact. By expanding access to county services without regard to immigration status, is the county creating incentives it can sustain, especially as resources become more constrained? From a governance standpoint, is this approach effective and responsible?
Well, I think that's a great question. This is a very timely topic. Just because the council unanimously approves this measure or is behind it, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. I would refer to Will Jawanda's taking school resource officers out of the schools. We all know that that was a bad idea, and even though all the council members supported it. Regarding the funding of this, I'm not sure that we have the resources here in Montgomery County to do all the great things that these people are talking about. And I think it comes down to a matter of the law. There's the supremacy clause. At the end of the day, the federal statute will supersede the local statute. And I think the solution might be something like the Dignity Act that was presented by Council Member Salazar from Florida. The idea of giving people a reasonable path forward to become citizens and become outstanding members of our society and of our communities.
You know, that's a fair point about Salazar's proposed legislation, and I know that there are a lot of members of Congress who support that. I personally do too. Mike, supporters say Bill 3525 strengthens civil rights and community trust, but some residents worry it weakens transparency and fiscal oversight. Should the county explicitly balance protections for vulnerable populations with accountability to all residents and commit to publicly tracking the fiscal impact of these services? In other words, we have no idea how much this is going to cost the county. What do we do about it?
Well, I think part of this challenge is that what the county's trying to address is we've seen, unfortunately, from the federal government, and we've seen this in spades this week, the reality that we're seeing people, many of the residents we have in Montgomery County being targeted, and are primarily being targeted on the basis of how they look or where they may happen to be from. And I think rightly, the county is trying to create an environment that says, look, we have representatives from all of the countries in the entire world living in Montgomery County. How do we create a welcoming community and an environment for all to live and thrive? And I think that is a very challenging objective to address given the challenges we have with the federal government right now. And I think that's what you're seeing trying to be balanced, is like the acknowledgement that we have people from everywhere in the world here. We want all those people to be here to contribute and to thrive, while at the same time, we also know they're going to have limited resources in how we actually manage, especially with the reductions coming from the federal government and from the state government. And I think that that's the balance that you're trying to see, is how do we make sure that people are welcome here and they know that they're welcome here, while at the same time allow ourselves to be able to provide the services to support all of our residents to be successful. And that's not an easy needle to thread by any stretch of the imagination. I think this legislation is an attempt to provide that perspective that says we're here together to try and get to successful outcomes, and to then try to identify what tools do we need to be able to then manage from a budgetary and fiscal perspective to get the outcomes that we need to know our residents are being served.
So fair points, but I will say this, that Montgomery County has a 33% foreign-born population, and the national average is 15%. So we really rolled out the mat for the a foreign-born population to get started, to thrive here. And at what point, though, do we say that we have to take care of the community writ large? And so if we continue to do this and we become a magnet for immigrants coming to this area, whereas they don't have the personal resources to take care of themselves, isn't it only fair to all the taxpayers in Montgomery County that they have an opportunity to know the data, the percentage of the population that is being served?
Well, I think one of the challenges implicit in how you frame that is that you assume that people who are coming here from other jurisdictions, and unfortunately, the fact that we're attractive is because I think many other jurisdictions are making their communities less attractive and are actually forcing people out. So yes, if we have a welcoming community and this is a place that people can reside because they feel that we actually respect and want to treat them with dignity, I don't see that as a big problem. But the other piece that I think is problematic with what you articulated there is we assume that people coming here from other places necessarily don't have the means to support themselves. Arguably, the only part of the Montgomery County's economy that's growing right now is that's the entrepreneurship that we're seeing from people here coming from other places. We're seeing very little typical traditional economic growth taking place. And candidly, as a person who's grown up in a very non-diverse community in upstate New York, the folks that I have seen in my existence who are coming here and actually expecting that government handouts are actually people that look an awful lot like me, not people who come here from different countries who actually are people of color. They're coming here because of the economic opportunity that's afforded to them and their ability to actually be able to create those opportunities and create businesses to grow and thrive. And so, if the fact that people are coming here because we're a welcoming community and they're going to bring their talents and treasures to be able to then help grow our economy, I think that's more of a benefit than it is a hindrance.
You know what, let me wrap this up just by saying that more than half of my business is dealing with foreign-born individuals, and they come with cash. They come with a lot of cash to buy homes. It's amazing. And it's really enriched my world getting to know them. So to your point, yeah, they're very entrepreneurial, but we do have a segment of the population that comes in that is indolent, and they need a lot of help. And so that is where perhaps what we need to do if we're going to be having this kind of program, that we need to be able to account for the percentage of people and the amount of money that we're spending on people that are potentially here illegally, or however you want to phrase it, so that we know what we're funding. Now we're going to move on to another topic here. Adam Pagnucco of Montgomery Perspective reports that since rent control took effect in 2024, average quarterly multifamily housing permits have fallen about 96% from roughly 582 units to just 23. What does this signal for Montgomery County's long-term housing supply and economic future? And Mike, I'm going to toss this one back to you. Is this precipitous drop in multifamily housing permits an acceptable short-term trade-off for tenant stability, or evidence of a policy failure that will worsen affordability long-term?
Well, it exacerbates what was already an existing challenge in Montgomery County and the region, quite honestly. The region, the Washington, D.C. region, is very well behind the number of housing units that need to be built in the first place. And Montgomery County, unfortunately, as has been the case recently, is even further behind what the region's averages are. So we already knew that this was something we weren't doing well. In order to increase or reduce increase housing affordability and reduce housing prices, we have to have a greater supply of houses. And so unless we can do that, we're not going to see we're not going to see housing prices decrease. And so we can put a short-term fix out there, which is what the council tried to do, which is try and put a cap on that, which sounds good because it says we're going to address housing affordability. But if you've limited the supply of housing, at some point, all of those prices increase. So I think it was a very bad thing for them to have done. I think the challenge, we're perpetuating the economic challenges that Montgomery County has already faced in the eyes of many. Many organizations don't come here, don't want to come here, don't want to grow here because they see this as not a place that's friendly to business. That only further exacerbates that and is ultimately making this a more expensive place for our residents to live. And so I think it's very short-sighted what they passed, and I think it really creates very difficult challenges for our economy to grow going forward.
Sally, when companies, to Mike's point about when companies are looking to come here, potentially relocating or expanding, housing availability and cost for their workforce is often a deciding factor. What message does a 90+% drop in these permits send to employers evaluating Montgomery County versus Northern Virginia or other nearby jurisdictions? If there's a perception of political risk, how does that perception affect long-term private investment in the county?
Actually, I totally agree with Mike that this is a real problem of, I will say, unintended consequences. The people in the county council and county executive, they fail to realize that investment has feet and will go elsewhere. If people can't make a profit with what they're doing, they're going to go to Northern Virginia, PG County, or DC. As I think Adam Hagnuko actually wrote that Montgomery County has basically been redlined. People aren't going to invest here because of the instability of their investments. What this does is this also devastates our tax base. With less people, then we have less places to spread the tax burden over. The other issue is this is going to take a long time to recover from, because there's an ongoing perception that Montgomery County is, as Mike said, not business friendly. And the permitting process, there's a long pipeline of a couple of years between when you decide, hey, I want to invest, and you can actually start building things. One of the ironic things is I've been to some of the county executives' presentations about the budget and tax, et cetera, and he fails to realize that the charts don't invest, that investors do. And if they can't actually make a profit, they're not going to do it. So I think that I agree with Mike. This is a bad decision. The question is, how long is it going to take for the leaders in the county to realize that this was truly a bad decision, and how do they politely get out of it politically?
Well, two questions. Do you see them actually taking that up and saying, mea culpa, we made a mistake, we need to walk this back entirely, or would they do it incrementally? That's number one. And number two, can you tie in? Can you see how when we have an open door policy for immigrants coming here and they need housing and they're going to absorb the lowest rung of the housing ladder, so it makes that less available and pushes up the cost of the rent or what, in the housing stock. So it's all kind of tied in. It looks like to me that our generosity here needs to be deeply evaluated to see if it's really benefiting the county writ large. What do you say?
Well, I mean, interestingly, we have not had significant population growth over the last 5 to 10 years. And so what you're seeing is the fact that we haven't built new housing. We're seeing moderate growth, but we're not seeing an influx of people, and all of a sudden we've got so many more people that we now have not enough housing. We haven't built new housing. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we have, is the fact that we're not even keeping up with the traditional moderate increase in population that you would typically expect to see. And so, I mean, I think that that's one of the challenges that we have, is we're not even just keeping pace with what would just normally be happening. And so now we're even further behind the 8 ball as a result of this of rent control. And so
let me jump in on that one too. The fact that the population in Montgomery County is actually going down, we see with the ability for people to work from home and hybrid working, they don't have to leave their home in Frederick to do their job. So there's a question of how much housing do you really need? And I go back to a lot of these projections were based on the Council of Governments study, I think from 2017, and that was before COVID, that was before the various downturns in the economy. So I think when we're looking at this, we need to look at it through a lens of what is the real projections. Where are we really going versus just based on prior data, which is really out of
Which is a really good point, Sully. And I think one of the challenges that we have to recognize that these pieces do relate to each other. And so, in addition to not seeing population growth and not new housing, we're also not seeing any job growth. And if you look at parts of the country right now that are seeing job growth, seeing population growth, seeing revenue increases, and seeing housing, all of those pieces are happening. They've built houses. As a result of having built housing, they can now attract businesses. As a result of being able to attract those businesses, they're now attracting more people, and they're actually seeing the revenues increase, and their budgets are actually doing quite well. And so we want to be careful not to say, well, we're not getting new jobs, and therefore we don't want to have more housing, because we want to be in a position to say we have an affordable supply of housing. As a result of that, we have a place that you can come and locate your business because your people can afford to live and work here and come here with your job. So now we can continue to grow that and make sure those pieces are working. We don't want to kind of stagnate into the other direction.
Also, at the same time, though, Mike, it becomes a chicken or egg thing. Do you have the jobs first, and then, the businesses want to come here, and we say, okay, when you relocate your business here, we're going to have housing that can support those businesses. I mean, if the business pays, say, $150,000, then that mandates a certain level of housing. And so I think we need to look at the big picture and say, we need to get jobs, because the job growth here in Montgomery County has been morbid, and we just really need to. I think that's got to be job one, so to speak.
Well, if you look at the jurisdictions where it's been successful,
excuse me, Mike, I'm sorry to cut in here, but we're gonna have to move on. Just one final point, and that is that we didn't talk about the regulatory environment, which makes it difficult for businesses to find Montgomery County a good place to do business. So that's a topic for another day. When we come back from this short break, more school issues. Groups opposed to teachers' unions' political involvement say they've obtained a leaked version of the National Education Association's 2026 election strategy, which they claim focuses on backing Democratic candidates, opposing Republicans, and advancing DEI-oriented messaging. Supporters say this protects educators and public education, while critics argue the union's political focus comes as student academic performance continues to lag. Sully, the leaked plans are described as emphasizing DEI messaging and political mobilization. How do you respond to critics who say these efforts have become overtly partisan rather than education focused, especially when so many students here and across the country are struggling with basic academic benchmarks?
Well, I think first we have to realize that the NEA they don't advocate on behalf of the students and the teachers. They are basically a political special interest group that's really geared towards self-preservation. So, I mean, their behavior echoes that. I mean, the fact that they gave $43 million to various left-wing political groups, that tells a story right there. I would offer that maybe what we want to consider is pulling their federal charter. If the NEA is actually a 501c5 labor organization, that's what they should be promoting, not these social policies that I don't think are really helping our children at the end of the day. Things like boys and girls locker rooms, the LGBT mantra. I'm not sure that that's really helping our students. Take a look, even locally, we have Will Jawanda, who wants to put women's products in boys' bathrooms, and his, they want to keep the parents in the dark about what's going on with their kids in schools. These are the things that I think don't help our education process, because our schools, their mission is to educate our children. And obviously by the test scores, they're not achieving that mission.
And what about locally? What do you think local activists should be, and I'm speaking more specifically on the conservative side, what should they be doing to counter this?
Well, first of all, rule number one is you can't change anything until you get somebody elected. And we need the conservatives, the people who have their children here, who care about their education, who are involved in their education, they need to band together and get reasonable people elected. And so we don't have situations where, like when Julie Yang was president, some of the scandals and issues that they had locally. We need to make it so that the students get the education that they need. And the only way to do that is to work together and to have conservative or reasonable voices on the elected boards.
So I'm going to move on to Mike and ask you, if unions reduced their political activity, how would educators protect themselves in legislative debates over funding, class size, or working conditions? And what do you say to parents who feel marginalized by the largest union in the country that leans so far left and interferes with different values they behold and teach at home?
Well, I think it's interesting. So I can't speak to, I don't defend the NEA. I don't know the NEA well as an organization. I know that we've unfortunately created an environment, unfortunately being led to a great degree by the White House right now, that is creating a significant divisiveness. And so you're either on one side or you're on the other side. I think what Sully just said, and I agree with, is in order to educate our children, we need to understand what their needs are, and we need to make sure that we're providing them the resources to be able to learn in the classroom, ultimately be able to get the test scores they need to go on and be successful, thriving residents in our communities. That means that you have to understand who those students are. And I think that when we try to go after and we say DEI, I think that's an easy way to say something that becomes a nice little catchphrase, when the reality is, as I said earlier, we have residents from every country in the world living here in Montgomery County. And so by definition, we have diversity. We have to be able to provide all of those students with the ability to thrive. And so we need to understand what their needs are, as we have with students in classrooms for the last 200 years in the United States. And so how do we make sure we understand what their needs are and make sure that we're providing them what they need to ultimately be successful? And I think we have to work together to do that. And so from my perspective, that needs to be where the emphasis is, to understand how do we collectively work as a community, teachers, parents, legislators, administrators, to understand who's in the classroom, who we're teaching, and then how do we actually make sure we give them the best resources to ultimately be successful in what they need to learn to thrive in our community.
I think that everybody would agree with you on that, Mike. But the question that I have is that Montgomery County had to spend a fair amount of money defending itself against this opt-out measure. And they went all the way up to the Supreme Court. So how much money in Montgomery County was spent on that? The point there is that there's a strong enough contingency here in Montgomery County that says we don't want the political aspect of life wedged into their education, at least not so young. So why is it that we always seem to have this battle? It seems like a perennial battle.
Well, I always think that people are trying to look for a battle, and I want to be careful with this. I was just looking at a report the other day where people went back and looked at how many parents had actually opted out of the information. And I'm not defending where the school system was on that or wasn't. I think it went further than it had to, and I think conciliation could have been made along the way that would have allowed us to get to a better outcome before it went to the Supreme Court. That notwithstanding, I believe the report I saw showed 80 families have opted out of materials. So in a school system where we have 160,000 students, we had this great big back and forth. And at the end of the day, there are 80 families that chose to opt out. And so on the one hand, I think we need to make sure that we're more accommodating and engaging people. On the other hand, we also live in a very diverse community with a wide array of thoughts. And this became a significant flashpoint that 80 families ultimately opted their children out of something. And so it's a very, very small percentage of the overall population that apparently thought this was a very big deal. And so,
Mike, I'm going to disagree with you respectfully on that, because I think what's happening is that the parents do not want to be identified as potential troublemakers or have their kids marked. And so that's part of the reason why I don't think that they're participating. Also, they've made it very onerous for parents that you have to look at a list of approximately 1,500 books, I think it is, and then specifically opt out of those books that they don't even have they barely have time,
now to be fair, Stacey, one of the things everybody says is parents really want to understand what's going on in the classroom. They really want to understand, really want to engage. And so when we give them materials and the opportunity to participate and engage, if the answer is, wow, I don't have time to engage, well, come on, we can't really have our cake and eat it too here, folks. Do you want to participate and you want to engage? Then participate and engage.
But I think that giving them an entire list and saying, like, in other words, instead of having to go book by book, let's just say these are the books for the third graders. These are the books for the second graders. I don't know exactly how they've got it, but that's just what I
was going
heard.
to say. I was pretty sure.
Let me jump in on a possible solution. instead of having like the 1,500 books that you have to read and basically check off that you want to opt your child out of these, maybe what we do is we have, instead of these books that are projected, that are given to the students, instead of it being so far left, that the original list needs to be a little bit towards the middle, something that's reasonable, rather than having that many books that you have to go through, that are, in some cases, I've looked at some of these, that are almost offensive to first and second graders. I think that we need to start with being reasonable first.
All right, we're going to have to move on here. Thank you, Sully, for that. And now stay tuned for parting shots. Thanks for staying tuned. We don't have enough time for parting shots. We were having so much fun in our current conversations. Have a good new year, and we look forward to seeing you at the next 21 This Week.